This episode of the Huddle Breakdown is brought to you in association with the One Football app, your one-stop shop for all your football goodness. The One Football app is the best football app on the market right now. You can get your fixtures, your results, live scores, transfer news, squad updates, everything that you need on the team that you support is available now in the One Football app. The One Football app, you can subscribe to the team you support, and all of the stuff that you need on that team is available all in the one spot, and it's all completely free as well. So download the One Football app now using the link in the description below. Not only are you supporting the channel, supporting the Huddle Breakdown, you're also getting a top-notch football app as well. So use the link in the description below to download the One Football app now. And you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown as we look back to Celtic's 1-1 draw against Shakhtar Donetsk in the second game of the group stages of the Champions League. A disappointing draw in many ways, but a good performance again from Celtic as they get their first points off this Champions League campaign and remain third in the table after RB Leipzig lost their second game to Real Madrid. Juco James and Alan Morrison are with me as always. One thing that the podcast listeners won't have heard because I'll have taken it out is the ad for the One Football app, which is the sponsor of the content across the channel over the next month or so. And guys, one thing that I've noticed is my background might be a little bit different to the point in time that I recorded that ad, because I was outside, and as many people who are watching the podcast on YouTube right now are noticing, I'm inside. What's going on?
It's a mystery to me. I couldn't track your movements after the first 3 months. I gave up. It was just too time consuming. I just want spreadsheets of all your movements, and it's too much.
I just want to know, has your relationship survived, or is she wizened up?
Well, I'm currently sitting in her sitting room, so it's still at that point. So it's still healthy enough. And for those of you who don't have any clue what we're talking about, I'm back at home, so we will be back to somewhat regular schedules over the next couple of weeks or so as I bed my way back in to real life, so to speak. Thanks to everyone who is watching live on YouTube, especially Lemmy, who says that it's 2 a.m. in Australia. So if you're watching from Australia, fair play to you. I don't know why you're doing that, but you can get it afterwards, but fair play to you regardless. Thanks for joining us as we look back on Celtic's draw against Shakhtar Donetsk in the Champions League. First point for Celtic on the table, and just to run you through some of the stats, because I've actually had a chance to do a bit of prep before this show. Celtic were, in fact, the dominant team, as was reflected in the stats. Expected goals on FOTMOB is 1.48 to 0.38 to Shakhtar Donetsk. So Celtic were the dominant teams in terms of expected goals. And when it came to shots, Celtic 16-5, shots on off target 6-0, shots on target 6-2. Celtic were really the dominant team in this game. And I know, Alan, you brought up the SofaScore momentum shift that they do on their app, and it was pretty much all Celtic except for one period in the first half after Shakhtar scored. Again, after the match, Ange asked about the performance, the result, and again, he's saying that the performance was really good, and if they keep playing this way, then they will get the reward. So, again, I was quite annoyed watching this game. I think, especially in the immediate aftermath, emotions do run high when it comes to these games. James, I was disappointed after this game, and I will explain why, because it was a good performance again, yes. And again, it's positive. Celtic are back in the Champions League after a long time. They're not getting embarrassed when it comes to the teams that are, that they're playing against. They're playing their style. They're implementing themselves into the game. But if you're this dominant in a game, you need to win it at this level. Otherwise, you're going to end up back in the Europa League. And that's why I think I'm most disappointed, is that I know that everybody's expectations have been raised because of what happened over the last year and a half under Ange. And I know that you should be grateful with seeing positive performances from Celtic. But I don't think Ange is going to be happy with this result, because he knows that it was an opportunity miss. And that for me is the key phrase. This was an opportunity miss for Celtic, I think.
Yeah, I would probably characterize my sense coming out of the game as frustratingly content, if that's a thing. Meaning that it was an opponent, given the circumstances and their style of play, that I expected that we should do very well against. I'm content that we actually did, so that's a good thing. There weren't any kind of big surprises that came out of the game as far as purely from an analytical perspective. Frustrating because we didn't get 3 points out of it, and kind of the balance of play, we probably deserved it. I think saying that we were dominant probably overstates it a little bit. I think we were definitely we controlled the game. We definitely created a lot more chances. So I think it tilted towards we were in control, but dominance probably too strong of a word for my liking. But again, within the broader context, we're in the Champions League playing a reasonably quality side, kind of on the road. I mean, if you want to call it, and again, the circumstances were a little weird, but it wasn't at Celtic Park. So when you throw all that into the mix and you get this kind of performance, I think that's, it'd be ridiculous to try to characterize it as anything other than quality. But for me, it was kind of an expected quality, which again, that's the contentness. And, we'll talk about what it might mean going forward, but it was heartening that we basically delivered on what we probably should have going into it. But ultimately frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's difficult for me as a Celtic fan who watched Celtic 2 years ago under Neil Lennon and that capitulation and how bad they were, and sort of reconciling how far they have come to the point where I was disappointed with getting a draw in the Champions League, even though it looked improbable that Celtic would be back in the Champions League in such a short period of time. But I think that's the expectations that comes with playing Champions League football, is that if you switch off for 5-10 minutes, you're probably going to get punished. If you don't take your chances, you're probably not going to win the game. And I think that's the missing piece for Celtic at the minute, is that they are switching off for 10 minutes. They are failing to convert good chances against good opposition who, aren't going to just sit down and you will eventually grind them down. This is going to be a long old slog for Celtic in terms of readjusting to Champions League mode after so long away from it. Alan, I know you had an event on, so you didn't get to catch the game live, but you've looked back at a good bit of it. In terms of the way that Celtic play, they are playing their game, so that's one positive you can definitely take from it. But there was a period where Shakhtar got on top in the first half after they had scored. But before that is kind of the key part of the game for me, before they got that goal, because it felt as though Celtic went 1-0 up, and maybe it was down to, the issues that they had last week with fitness levels against Real Madrid, that they kind of died off after 60 minutes. Maybe the players had that in their head and wanted to conserve energy a little bit with their pressing. But it seemed like Celtic, to rob a phrase from mainstream TV, it felt like they took their foot off the gas a bit. It felt like they stopped playing their own game. And that's, for me, is what was most disappointing with letting Shakhtar scores, was that it felt entirely preventable if Celtic had continued to play the way that they started the game.
Yeah, so I kind of felt the same as how I think the manager felt. I mean, he was spectacularly grumpy after the game. I mean, quite amazingly so. And I think that came from a good performance mixed with a result that the performance he felt probably didn't merit. And if you do that at this level, you're not going to get very far. That is the sad reality of it. It's just a brutal competition. And if you don't take your chances, which we're now talking about not taking your chances for 2 games in a row now, we actually matched almost precisely the XG from the Real Madrid game. So and away from home in Europe, that's good. Again, we had 8 shots inside the box in central positions and didn't score any of them. They didn't have a single one from that position. And so I think that's why the manager was frustrated. I suspect what he was saying in private was different to what he said in public, which was to defend the players and praise the performance. And it's the sort of classic, Alex Ferguson playbook of kind of team management, really, in that respect. All that being said, there are clearly positives, and also, again, I'll come back to the need to be patient, because this is a really, really tough competition, and it's should be blindingly obvious to everybody. And so, although we're all frustrated, this is, for a start, a very young team, and also a team that is going to have to learn how to adapt to playing all the different, conditions, situations, scenarios that crop up in these games, which are many and different. You mentioned the momentum bar. That was actually quite interesting because it was just absolutely crazy in the first 10 minutes in terms of Celtic's dominance. Celtic won the ball back, or should I say, Shakhtar lost possession in their own defensive third 6 times in the first 10 minutes of the game. Real Madrid, we forced Real Madrid to cough up the ball in their own final third 6 times in the first half, which I suspect they don't do very often at all. But then, like you say, we just seem to, having scored, I don't think we then knew how to manage the game. I don't think we knew how to find the balance between continuing to press super aggressively as we had done and continue to throw people forward, high verticality of passing, or whether actually just ease back and not die on our feet, like you say, like we did against Madrid. And I don't think we got the balance right. And this is all part of the learning curve and of the experience that's needed at this level. So, just think back through, some of the really good Champions League teams over the last 20 years. Think how long it took we mentioned Alex Ferguson. Think how long it took Manchester United to actually, easily the best team in England for 15 years. It took them a long time to actually find their feet in the Champions League. Manchester City still haven't won it, with all the millions and billions thrown at it. And actually, they took years to even be able to get out, and sometimes they weren't even getting out of the group stage. Paris Saint-Germain, another example. I know they've got probably a bit of a badly run club. Another good example I go back to is people old enough to remember an absolutely superb Olympic Lyon side from the early part of the century. It took them 3 years. They won the French title, I think, about 10 or 11 times in a row. It took them 3 years to learn how to get out of the group stages. And then for 9 years in a row, they always got out of the group stages, and they usually got to the quarterfinals or even the semi-finals. But that team had to grow and learn how to deal with all the different situations. So I think we have to be really, really patient. I mean, you go back to the Postecoglou interview that he gave for Open Goal, where he said, what we want is this team to be a consistent Champions League performing team. And he also said, it may be after I've gone that they do that. And I don't think he was alluding to running off to Brighton or anything like that. I think he just recognised that it can take years to build up the nous and the game intelligence to actually compete and turn draws into wins. In games like this. So I don't think we can be overcritical of the team after 2 games, and I don't. But I think it's right to be frustrated because clearly the game was there to be won. So they were clearly the better side, and it is very frustrating. It really is, because a win yesterday would have pretty much, I think, guaranteed European football after Christmas of some sort, and that may still manifest itself. So I think I would focus on the game management. I would focus on how long it takes, and then my final point is, I made the point last week that when we drew with Madrid, that we lost to Madrid, but what was really significant was that the very experienced players, Hart, McGregor, Juranovic, experienced international players, all played really strong games and all stood up. And then you look back to the goal that we conceded last night. McGregor gambles in midfield and misses the ball. Juranovic lets Mudryk run off him, and the shot goes through Hart, central to the goal. So that's your 3 most experienced players. 3 things going kind of wrong in a row, and you do one thing wrong, and you concede a goal, and that's what happens at this level. And so they're going to have to. There's no secret here. They're going to have to grow and develop and mature and learn, and that's to me the main takeaway, really.
Mm-hmm. Just so people are aware of how the group is currently standing, as you mentioned, The Real Madrid game against Leipzig ended 2-0. Real Madrid are top with 6 points. Shakhtar are second on 4 points. Celtic third on 1 point. RB Leipzig on the bottom of the table with 0 points from 2 games. Celtic now have 2 weeks off from the Champions League. So 5th of October is the next game. That's against Leipzig away. And then that fixture is going to be reversed then as we head into the second games from the Champions League. So I've looked at the table, and I know permutations are a big thing that people love to talk about every single week. But as it stands, the best case scenario for Celtic in this group is that they get 2 wins, can see them through. That's assuming the Shakhtar and Leipzig draw their next game. And then Shakhtar lose both their games against Real Madrid. That would leave them on 6 points. Worst case scenario is that Shakhtar actually go and beat Leipzig again, which means Celtic would need a minimum of 2 wins and a draw from their final 4 fixtures rather, to get a minimum of about 8 or 9 points to get out of this group, or get out to the last 16 in the Champions League. So that's sort of where the group stands after the second game of the Champions League group stages. One thing that I do want to sort of tease out a little bit more before we get into the actual game itself is what we're mentioning here, and it's something that we talk about a lot on the show, is the performances and having patience and how that allows you to develop over the long course of the season. Now, one of the things that Pep Guardiola is very famous for is winning league titles, but he doesn't have as many Champions League titles to back it up. He doesn't, he hasn't won a Champions League title really without Messi and his team. He struggled to make that transition into knockout football in Champions League. And I want to tease that out with Celtic. Obviously, they're not going to win the Champions League, but, a quarter-final would be a phenomenal result for Celtic to get to in the Champions League and the current standings of world football. When you talk about league football, performances are everything. It's the bread and butter of this show, really, is that if the performances are there, if the benchmarks are there, if the underlying data is good, then eventually it will come good. That's the sort of belief of the XG model and everything else that goes with it. In Champions League, it's a little bit different, I think. How long do we wait for this? How long do we think before the tide starts to turn in Celtic's favor if they keep this level of performances up? Because you only really get 8 games in the group stage. That's not really enough time for this to develop, I don't think.
So there's we've talked about this since the show's inception, the practical reality of the disparity between sample size. I mean, if you're just talking about randomness and variance, which a lot of that enters into such a low scoring sport when you're talking about results versus performance levels. And, in cup competitions where it's one game, that's exponentially more volatile. And obviously, as you get down to 6 games in a group, it's not quite as bad, but a lot of that gets kind of mean reverted out to a degree over 34 or 38 game, or 46 game, depending on the league you're in, season. So, and I actually just revisited this topic heading into this game in a column I wrote this week about, when you have an inherently volatile playing style, and I believe our manager does, you end up with more volatile results relative to the performance. And I want to come back to this idea that we've played well the last 2 games. I think we played well yesterday. I think we played well for about 50 minutes against Real Madrid, but then Real Madrid slaughtered us, let's be honest. And, that ended up being a game that wasn't really close. Now, can you go through all kind of alternate universes where it ended up, if the sequencing and we scored early and if buts and then all that stuff, but as I talked about last week, it ended up being about what our performance levels have been against higher tier teams. That's not Shakhtar. So Shakhtar is not that echelon. And I'm not even talking about Real Madrid, like those top 5 or 6 clubs in Europe echelon. I'm talking about getting into that next tier, whether it's a Chelsea or Tottenham or Salzburg or RB Leipzig, which we're going to have coming up. So I think it's dangerous to extrapolate too much from yesterday because of the opponent, because of the way that the opponent played and plays, I mean, they are very passive. They are very deliberate in build-up, right? They were, and I said this going into this group, that they were kind of a dream pick for us out of that pot because of how they played, above and beyond all the externalities, which, obviously they are victims of. But they play in a way that's almost a dream for us relative to strengths and weaknesses, in my opinion. That's my analysis, and was my analysis. So I think it's dangerous to extrapolate too much out of that game. And that we come back to this issue of, in my mind anyway, is the degree with which our playing style at this level against opponents that present really any reasonable challenge to us from a playing style perspective, which Shakhtar did not, how that's going to kind of play out. And I think that's where the Leipzig games are going to be, really a litmus test, because they present all of the problems that Shakhtar doesn't. And quite frankly, Real Madrid didn't, from a playing style perspective. I mean, Madrid's so freaking good with how many good players they have. That's a whole different problem. So, going back to the essence of your questions, in this knockout, this 1 or 6 games, when you have this kind of playing style that can be volatile at this level, and I say we do, it's really tough over a 6-game period to be able to have enough positive variance. And when you're giving up at 1.5, 2.5 XG to high quality opponents that have good finishers to a degree, at least competent to functional finishers, it's just going to be tough unless you have a keeper that can stand on their head, or, win games like Fraser Forster did. And we haven't seen that from Hart yet. I'm not saying he can't do it, but he hasn't done it yet. He's been competent. He's been functional. He hasn't been throwing balls into the net like the prior keeper had at times. But he also hasn't had one of those kind of performances, and he really hadn't had those for the last few years in his track record heading up to it. So, it gets really tough. And that's where even a team like Manchester City, where their playing style, it introduces a little more volatility because they are so attack. They don't control the game quite as much on the margins like a Real Madrid does. They're not that methodical, control-based type of strategy. You introduce that volatility, and just on the fine margins at this level, it can be a huge difference. So I think that's the essence of it, is that volatility. And when you embrace volatility, as our manager does, I think it presents another level of difficulty and challenge at this level. And I think that's, I think it's been proven so far at the European level. And I think, Leipzig's going to be a huge test. And those are the 2 most fascinating games to me of the season, really. Because we probably won't face anyone else that's even remotely close to them as far as this matchup kind of style. So I'll stop there. Sorry.
Do you want to hop in this, Alan?
Yeah, I can't disagree a little bit in the sense of, I think one of the probably unsung successes, and the reason it's unsung is because you think any competent manager could do this, but surprised how few there actually are, is that what Celtic have done, what Postecoglou's done with Celtic, is he's almost, I'm not going to say eliminated, but he's getting close to eliminating volatility in domestic performances. The performances are so consistent that, I suspect we're not going to be sitting here going, oh God, it's Livingston away. Oh God, we've got to play on a plastic pitch. Oh no, it's Hibs away. They're always a bit sticky. I don't think we care who we play in Scotland, home or away, whatever the surface, whatever the weather. We're going to end up about +2 XG on the opposition, irrespective of the lineup even that we pick, right? And he did that very quickly. And he did that with a core of about 16 players last season. And he's now got 22, 23 that he trusts this season. So that, to me, is demonstrable progress. It's demonstrable consistency, irrespective of whether you think the football's been great. The underlying performance data is consistent, and the results are matching it. Okay, now he's had 30-odd games undefeated in Scotland to sort of perfect, refine, and improve, and there's probably more improvement to come on that. And as we said, he's only going to get six group games with which to do that. And the difference in challenges, as James rightly said, between playing Real Madrid, Leipzig, Donetsk are just huge. Playing, whether you play Motherwell or Livingston, it's much of a muchness. But when you play Real Madrid or Leipzig, it's a hell of a difference. Different challenges in different ways. So very difficult to achieve the same thing. So I do still agree with James that there's going to be this huge amount of volatility, because what we have seen is that we're creating more chances than we've ever created against the better teams, and a very small sample, obviously. But against Madrid, we created a lot of chances, but we've not improved defensively and our ability to keep those teams out. If you look back at the games, and things like XG data, really only got like the Man City, PSG, Bayern Munich, Barcelona games under Rodgers. We're conceding as much XG in terms of Real Madrid game as we were in those matches. So that hadn't improved at all. But chink of light, game 2, I don't think we've ever conceded less XG in a group stage Champions League game than we did last night. Right now, I know it's circumstances were not in Donetsk's favour. Obviously, they're playing in Warsaw. The side's been decimated, but they still had a team that I reckon had at least 5, if not 6 players that absolutely walked it against Scotland in a World Cup qualifier for Ukraine. Right, these are not bad players. These are pretty solid players. So that's another positive. I think it's tiny samples, but if yesterday is an indication, it means that we maintained our attacking capability against two very different opponents, and we improved massively on our defensive. We really did keep them at arm's length, and the fact that we kind of lost our way in the first half and then reasserted almost complete dominance in the second is another sign of maturity. But again, I come back to the way that they pace themselves, and which they'll have to. Madrid showed that we can't just blast for 50 minutes and then die and then lose 4 goals in the last 20 minutes. You got to be able to pace the pressing. You got to be able to pace the intensity over a 90-minute performance, and that's going to take time to perfect. And maybe we didn't get it right yesterday. Maybe we went the other way. Maybe we should have gone for the second goal, and that would have killed the game. And then you could have coasted in for 45 minutes in the second half. All very easy to sit here and think that. But these are the sort of scenarios that the manager's going to have to wrestle with in terms of how he then takes that team to the next level. The next level is getting what they deserve in terms of the performances. But the underlying performances is what I'll always come back to. And so far, so good on that score. I just worry that if you don't get what you deserve, you're only going one way in this competition.
Yeah, I guess that's the main issue with the whole idea of playing against these teams, that it's all fun and games until you actually have to do it. And look, I do agree with you in many aspects, especially when it comes to controlling the game. That'll come, I reckon, with experience. If you look at the starting team last night, the amount of players that have actually played in the Champions League is few and far between. The amount of players that have played more than 5 games in the Champions League is even fewer. I think Joe Hart is probably the only player who has done that in the team. So look, it'll come. Hopefully, if the performances keep continuing in the way that they do, that Celtic will get at least one win in this group and finish in 3rd place and get into the Europa League. That for me is still quite a successful turnaround for Celtic over the last couple of years. If they do get 3rd place, ideally you want them to get into 2nd place. But with the current standings of the teams, I think it's going to be really difficult. One of the players that you mentioned the quality that Donetsk have, because because Celtic were so dominant, it's easy to forget that these guys do actually have some really top talent. Mudryk, who got the goal for them, he was rumored for a 27, 29 million move to Everton just before the summer transfer window ended. So, and he's the guy who got the goal. He was the guy that really stood out for Donetsk as well in terms of the quality that they had. He was up against Josep Juranovic he was on left wing. Juranovic obviously playing right back for Celtic. One thing that I've noticed, and maybe I'm being too harsh on him, maybe it's just because of the way that teams are playing against, is that there seems to be a lot of ball going in behind Juranovic. And now, when we were previewing the Champions League, we spoke a lot about Greg Taylor and his potential athletic weaknesses, and I think Greg Taylor's actually stepped up to the mark really, really well in the Champions League, again progressing from where he was. In terms of Juranovic, I think he's been caught out a couple of times. Maybe the stats won't actually back that up, but for me, whether it's, maybe it's not Jota tracking back enough, maybe it's a midfield issue. Is it a systematic sort of flaw in the way that Celtic play that we're seeing Juranovic get sort of burned for pace on the left wing these days, James? Or am I just imagining things a little bit?
Well, first of all, I'll address something that you said, which is a good point, which is there are limitations to event data. So, event data is not going to pick up something like somebody getting caught wrong-footed or positionally, falling asleep, quote unquote. So, that's not something that's in, kind of traditional event data that people are going to be monitoring. I think your broader point is, it's at some point you're going to face people in the Champions League that are really good.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Before I let you go any further, I will put my hands up and say that Juranovic has been up against the two best players from both the teams that we've played in terms of Vinicius Jr. and Mudryk. So you have to take that into context as well. So
and I think overall he's been pretty good both games, going up supremely fast opponents who are quite good. And when you're playing the high line that we do, sometimes you're going to have the ball bounce the wrong way, or a guy makes a good. I mean, that was a good pass. I mean, that was a really good read. It was
he meant that as well. That was a pass.
Yeah, it was completely intentional, and it was a through ball, and it was just it's one of those ones at the Champions League level. I think you just tip your cap and say, okay, it happens. Again, I think people are a little bit out over their skis on Taylor. He has played pretty well, but again, he hasn't been tested that much, meaning that I thought Shakhtar might go at him more, and they really didn't. I mean, on limited occasions they did. It didn't really go well for us. I mean, Shved dribbled at him once or twice and, beat him pretty bad. And Shved's not exactly, lightning fast. So, and, I don't know what feed you guys were watching, but the feed that we got in the US through what they call Paramount Plus, which has the Champions League. So we don't get the European announcers, I don't know if you guys saw the same replays as we did, but I think there's a pretty good shout. I was actually surprised that they didn't review that foul. It looked like a stonewall penalty. To me. Yeah. I mean, he fouled the guy in the box. I couldn't believe that they didn't do VAR. I mean, I was happy they didn't. But it got Alan. You're on mute, I think, Alan.
Sorry about that. I think it was a foul, but I thought the contact was outside the box. But to me, he put his knee into his back of his calf and knocked him over. Yeah, it looked quite clear actually.
Yeah. So I think he played okay, but it was another opponent that we talked about, like with Madrid with Valverde. Valverde's obviously an amazing player, but blistering pace and beating guys one-on-one and dribbling is not really where he stands out. So, I could, seeing Taylor go up against Mudryk or that level of guy who's just going to get the ball and go at you with pace, that's where I think we're more likely to see some struggles with him that might even be worse than Juranovic with the same context. So, it's just I wouldn't be too critical on Juranovic in that regard. It's just one of those things, I think, that's going to be a structural vulnerability. It's the same kind of things we talked about, teams that might target behind. I mean, if you remember this, when the Wayback Machine, like Alkmaar targeted behind our center backs with long balls because Hart wasn't coming out much. And, so that there are inherent vulnerabilities the way we play, and, smart teams are going to try to target some of it. And when you combine inherent vulnerabilities with a guy who's probably worth 50 million and receives a really good pass, then these things happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too harsh on Joe Hart either for the goal. The first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh, could he have done better?" And then I rewatched. It's
not ideal, but
he absolutely
human instinct to protect your face. I mean,
he thumped it at him. I don't think he would have got it anyway if he got his hand up. I think he actually was just a little bit delayed in his reaction. But in terms of the midfield, Alan, the weakness in terms of the counter-attack has been exposed a couple of times, especially when Cal McGregor took the risk that eventually led to the goal. But in reverse, when you look at the attacking play, Celtic do go through the middle quite a lot. It's why they play the inverted fullbacks as well to sort of crowd the midfield and control that area. I thought Shakhtar did quite well to stop Celtic doing that quite as much as they would have liked to in terms of going forward with Matt O'Reilly and Hatate. Hatate wasn't allowed to spray balls as much as he did potentially against Real Madrid and has done in the Scottish League as well. And Matt O'Reilly as well has really been, I think, targeted by teams as somebody to stop any means necessary, like crowd him out, get 2 to 3 men on him and stop him from playing balls over the top or down through the middle of the defense. Is that somewhere that Celtic need to look to potentially changing the play up a little bit and getting more sort of width in terms of their attacking play?
Yeah, I guess I'm not too concerned about, the creativity side of it, because we're creating enough chances, we're just not finishing. It's more the not finishing them bit I'm concerned about. We're creating, in 2 games we've had 8 shots, 12 shots in 2 games from central to the goal inside the box. So if that was like 0 or 2, I'd be concerned, but it isn't. O'Reilly's been asked to do something a little bit different. I mean, out of possession, we seem to have this 4-4-2 shape, or even 4-2-4 shape, and depending on how deep, the opposition are, and we press right onto them. And O'Reilly leads the press. O'Reilly's often the most advanced player, actually, probably because Kyogo runs about so fast. He's so quick to get back, moving both directions. But so yeah, is there a little bit of O'Reilly? He's spending so much time in the centre forward position pressing. Then when Celtic get the ball, but what we have found in the first 2 games is that in transition, O'Reilly's ended up getting on the ball in the 10 position because that's where he was pressing from, and he's then been able to release balls very quickly and cause chaos. So I don't have a problem with that. I think it's working pretty well. And again, I've only watched back from a data collection perspective the first 30 minutes. I thought Haksabanovic had a really good 30 minutes. I don't know I can't remember what he did in the last 15. Maybe he just collapsed, but I thought he was doing pretty well. He was taking players on. He was stretching the play. He had a big part to play in the goal. His timing of his pass to Hatate was perfect for Celtic's goal. So no, I don't have any concerns from an attacking perspective. I think the concerns are going to always be in transition, as James rightly said. There's inherent risk in the way we play. It was exposed with McGregor trying to nick a ball that just failed to do. And that one pass that took out the whole midfield. All 5 players were then in front of the ball from that moment. McGregor managed to fool Hatate. If you watch it, Hatate was completely going in the wrong direction once McGregor had lost it. But I think he was too deep, too far over to affect the play anyway. And then it was then an incredibly quick player against a very high line and a perfectly played pass. Juranovic is probably the quickest player in the Celtic team, so it was a surprise to see him get burned quite so much. But again, the timing of the pass, the timing of the run was perfect, and that's what even the lowest ranked Champions League teams are able to do to you. It doesn't get any easier for Juranovic, because he's now got 2 games up against Nkunku of Leipzig, so that's going to be fun for him.
Yeah, Haksabanovic sort of reminds me of Paddy McCourt in his early days of Celtic. Really exciting, really exciting, really good dribbler. Likes to take risks, but is absolutely gassed after 30 minutes. He looked off his feet by the end of the first half. So he still has to get up to. I think he still has to get up to speed with the fitness levels of the rest of the Celtic panel. Just before we finish off with the midfield discussion, Aaron Moy is being mentioned a lot in the comments of the YouTube stream so far. He came on as a sub, and I thought he was quite impressive, and he has been impressive since he came to Celtic in terms of the impact he has on the games and the control he brings, his passing range that he brings. Is it time to bring Aaron Moy into the starting lineup like Haksabanovic? But I just don't see who you drop out. I mean, I personally think the midfield 3 is staying the way it is for the foreseeable future. But again, I'm open to discussion on this point.
So part of it's a dual-edged sword in my mind. Part of the reason why we've been so competitive and good the last 2 games is that we haven't been perfect, but we've really cut down on the mistakes, right? And so to Alan's point, when you make a mistake like McGregor diving in, it just takes one or two of those in these games against this level of competition, and they translate into goals at a completely alarming rate, as we've seen over and over again in the Celtic past in Europe. Right, that's been the meme almost of the first 10 minutes Celtic mistakes, and then we're down, particularly away in Europe. Right, I mean, it's been our reality for how long now. So to the players' credit, to Ange's credit, like the quality of coaching, the effort, the intensity, everyone's been rowing in the same direction. It looks like we've made vast improvements in that regard. And you knew there was a but coming if it's coming from me. But neither Madrid nor Shakhtar play in a way that really is engineered to force mistakes and on a front foot basis, right? So they kind of sit back more and they wait for you to screw up. In particular, I mean, we talked about this last week. Real Madrid Ancelotti said it after the end. They almost came out with a rope-a-dope strategy, right, where they were going to kind of let us blow our load in the first half and then light us up in the second half. And so, we'll see. This is why I keep coming back to these Leipzig games. Let me put this into context, because I just did this comparison this morning. Leipzig playing against Real Madrid in Spain had roughly the same number of, let's call it defensive interactions with Real Madrid players as we did. And that was with, they had a little more possession than we did, but, is a kind of a neighborhood apples to apples comparison. But they regained the ball at twice the rate that we did. Right. So, and against Shakhtar, their regain rate was 3 times higher than our was yesterday against Shakhtar. So this is a different animal that we're going to go up against as far as how they play. This is what we talked about last week with Rose coming in, and this, Tedesco playing this kind of weird way that wasn't really in the Red Bull style. So, we're going to be confronted with a style of play with athletes that are at a level that are going to push the boundaries for us on not making mistakes. And that's where, these 2 first games were matchups where that just was not really much of an issue. So hopefully we are resilient. It's going to be that next step in that test, in my judgment. But if we end up having more of those kind of McGregors, right, they're going to push us into stress testing our ability to not make those kind of mistakes a lot higher, I think, at a much higher degree. So hopefully we pass the test with flying colors, but we have to see that.
Alan, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think you have to recognise that the way that Leipzig will play now under Rose also has risks for them, because as much as they will press Celtic, they will leave themselves open to transition against them as well. And Celtic are pretty good at that. We've got a lot of pace up front, and we've got very good passes of the ball in midfield. So, I think it'll be if you remember back to the games against Leipzig, 3-4 years ago, wherever it was, where we lost fairly comfortably, I think, away, but then that thrilling 2-1 victory at Celtic Park. It could be very similar. Could be very similar again. I didn't see the game against Madrid last night, Madrid-Leipzig, but looking at the data, it looks an incredibly close game. I mean, I think both teams were under 1 XG, 12 shots to 9. The possession was about 55-45. Looked like Madrid maybe it's not quite, I don't know if they'd rested players, but certainly wasn't quite as strong a team as they put out against Celtic. Obviously, Benzema's injured. But pretty strong team nonetheless. But yeah, I'm under no illusions now. When the group was drawn out, I was actually very optimistic, because the way that Leipzig played under Tedesco was just crazy. But now they're back under Rose. They've obviously put up a good show last night. Only lost 2 goals in the last 10 minutes. I think it's going to be back to the Leipzig that we saw a few years ago, and it's going to be a massive, massive test. But Celtic stood up to them before, where if anything, we're even more coherent now. And so there's no reason why we can't exploit their weaknesses as well. But you got to take your chances when they come.
Yeah, it's such an old football cliche, but it really is about making sure you do take those chances, especially in these sort of games. In terms of Leipzig, I think it's unfortunate timing for Celtic in many ways. I said before the draw happened that I wouldn't mind Juventus, and they are tanking under Allegri, so I'm still disappointed we didn't get a chance to play against Juventus. But what I would say is, like many games that Celtic play against, let's say, Rangers, for example, I think Celtic are so much further down the road in their game plan, in their style of play, in the possession that they do, and the attack, and they're so much more coherent and consistent in what they do. And Leipzig just aren't quite that yet, even though Rose is going to come in and change things and improve things from where they were. They're not going to be quite as far down the road in what they want to do compared to what Celtic want to do. So I'm still optimistic that Celtic can at least get a point against them, if not beat them when it comes to the home game. So I still think that I'm still optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that Celtic can get out of this group if results go its way. But I'm more pessimistic in the terms of, we sort of need things to go exactly how we need them to go over the next couple of weeks in terms of the other results. So we'll wait and see. The last couple of years have, without Champions League football, have sort of been weird, because every game you're building up to a league game, and it just, I don't know, it just feels weird going back to playing St. Mirren this Sunday after these big games, especially without the game at the weekend. So I guess, without going too deep into the St. Mirren game, is this something that Celtic are going to need to bounce back from? Do you think the players are going to be a little bit disappointed in themselves, or is it business as usual?
Good. Who knows? This is where, to Alan's point, the earlier that he made, because that's actually his point was part of what I wrote about this week, was that how much we have dampened volatility domestically, and how really extraordinary that's been. So I don't, with our increase in depth, and it seems like Kyle McGregor is never going to get a day off in his life, regardless of the manager. But would be a good game to play Moy and that kind of thing. So there's just ample depth of quality now relative to domestic competition, that one would think that with competition for places and wanting to get an opportunity to put themselves on the platform in the Champions League for their careers, that players would be motivated and just above and beyond being professional. So I don't think that will be an issue of any significance. And again, these underlying trends are positive enough that it really should be a game that we're dominant, and truly dominant in a domestic sense, and in control of.
Yeah, I think if we'd been playing at the weekend, I think you'd have seen a significant number of changes to the team at the weekend. But I think the way it'll go this weekend is we don't have a game now for 2 weeks after
October.
Yep. So I think based on how grumpy the manager was, and based on the fact we don't have a fixture 2 weeks, I think you'll see as strong, unless there's people carrying knocks, I think you'll see, if not the same team, as close to the same team again. Pretty much. Mm-hmm. I don't think you'll see any rotation unless it's forced on us. To be honest, so listen, St. Mirren, they're probably not the worst team in the league by they're a very long ball orientated side, 3-5-2, which they've been very consistent about that 3-5-2 in all the games. So whether they're more likely to fall back into a 5-3-2, in all honesty. And because otherwise they'll get ripped apart in the flanks. They won 3 games in a row, including wins against Ross County and Hibs, who are both reasonable sides, and then lost 3-0 at St Johnstone. I mean, I can't remember the last time St Johnstone ever scored 3 goals. It was probably many, many years ago. So they're a bit of a weird team. But as I say, I think that the most important thing is what Celtic do, and I think you'll see as close to the strongest team out against them, because I don't think the manager will want to let up at all domestically on the back, especially in the back of that performance. If he's going to be grumpy, dropping a points on Wednesday, he's going to be mega grumpy if he drops any points against St Mirren. So I just think it'll be as strong as we go.
Yeah, I think that's the main one. After watching Ange post match, it made me feel better about being frustrated, because I know a lot of fans are reluctant to be frustrated at this point in time because of how far we've come. But I think the manager's reaction tells you all you need to know about how he really felt about that game and how he really felt the result should have went. So I think we will see a little kick up the backside for this team, regardless of how happy the fans are or not with that draw in Shakhtar. Alan, before we finish up, I just want to say thank you for doing the podcast on such a sad week. I know it must have been difficult for you to muster up the courage for after all the blackouts and the mourning. I'm just happy you took a break from mourning Her Majesty to come on the podcast and put on a brave face. So thank you for that.
I'll be back in my little sad corner in about 30 seconds when we're done. Don't worry.
Yeah, no TV, no radio, just sitting in silence in your.
Oh no, I'll watch the BBC. You know, wall to wall, mate, wall to wall.
It's what you would have wanted. That's exactly what you would have wanted.
Can I come and live in Ireland or America? I'm not too bothered where, but well, I'm probably not America because you spend all your time shooting each other, but maybe Ireland.
We can't bloody skip it here either. Like, being made feel bad for not mourning this woman. I swear to God. Anyway, that is all joking aside. We will be back with the Huddle Breakdown again next week, looking at the St Mirren game, which again, it just feels so weird going back to sort of domestic football after playing Champions League football. But them's the breaks, as Boris Johnson once said. My thanks to everybody who watched on YouTube and who is listening to the podcast. If you want to get the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, you can get it on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you're listening to the podcast and you want to get the YouTube, it's available on YouTube at Breakdown Inc. You can subscribe to the channel and get notified every time there's a new video that goes live. Like I said, I am back in Ireland now, so there will be more regular sort of scheduling with the Huddle Breakdown, and I'll be back doing my solo videos as well on the channel over the next couple of weeks. But until then, Alan, James, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. We'll chat to you later. Good luck.